Hello， 大家好，我是李恩。各位观众，今天真正要揭秘的时刻到了。我们上一期做了 Mega 呢因爱泼斯坦案而分裂，我不担心这一部影片呢，很多人相信恐怕都对我的上一部影片打一个大大的疑问，就是为什么我认为没有所谓的客户名单。一般观众朋友呢，你们在主流媒体上面所看到的爱泼斯坦的形象呢，恐怕跟你认识的有非常大的出入。因为资讯量的不同，所以我在上部影片的主轴并不是要谈爱泼斯坦的身家背景，所以我并没有过多的琢磨。但是我有提到一个关键点，那就是爱泼斯坦他的多重身份，注定了他的案情绝对不是大家表面看到的这样。当然，你说他是不是一个性侵的惯犯？那绝对是。好，这个不会有错。他确实性侵了多名的未成年少女跟女大学生。首先，第一个问题来了。通常，如果我在推敲这类所谓的悬案呢，首先一定要先去质疑的东西，就是曾经是否有发生过爱泼斯坦被指控或者是被逮捕，对吧？他过去个人的这种无法无天的性侵多名未成年少女以及女大学生呢，其实2006年呢，爱泼斯坦就受到了佛罗里达州南区的检察官的起诉。原本检察官认为已经有40名以上的女性互相指证他犯下不当的性侵。检察官手上原本认为是至少要被判关100年以上的家伙，结果没想到在2008年居然与联邦政府达成认罪协商呢，最后只被判2年，而且还在狱中当中呢缩减为13个月的坐牢就结束。更离谱的是，这13个月只是在一个县级的监狱里头呢，每周1到5可以自由外出，只要1个礼拜去1天就好。一切真正的最大疑问，我们先从他最不可思议的司法特权，他为什么会受到如此的轻判，而这背后又怎么样凸显出爱泼斯坦神秘可是却又极度的享有美国政府高度特权的事实。那我今天特别利用的是美国知名的 podcast 主持人 Derek Cooper， 他是一个深耕型的历史研究者，长期对于这种重大的政治跟历史事件的脉络挖掘呢，他是这方面的好手。Derek Cooper 有一个很大的优点，他自己是以最诚实的历史学家自居，不靠任何企业或是政府的资助，他是自主的收集资料并还原真相。爱泼斯坦这件事情，过去早就有诸多的蛛丝马迹能够来证明爱泼斯坦的背景不一般，而这些 Derek Cooper 都会为我们做最清楚的还原。从这里开始，你会发现一切都跟你以为的不再一样。
Hold on to your butts.
How did he get busted? What was he accused of? What was he convicted of?
So Epstein's thing that he would do usually is, starting with Ghislaine Maxwell as his initial recruiter, he would find girls that were vulnerable in one way or another. Some, young girls, usually at high schools. He wasn't, by all accounts, I think the youngest girl that he's accused of messing with was 12 years old at the time. So, execute him or bury him under the prison, but, a little bit different proclivity than the prepubescent pedophile type.
It is
probably a different psychology, but through Maxwell, story goes, she would go out and she would identify a girl who, very often was from a broken family or from, no father in the picture, was very important because fathers tend to beat the hell out of, 40-year-old guys who sexually assault their daughters. And so you find these girls who kind of already have some problems, and you would bring them in to give them a massage. Say, look, he's this wealthy guy. He's very interesting. He just likes to get massages. He'll pay you $200 to give him a massage. Don't you want to just make $200? Back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, a lot of money for high school girls, especially from the wrong side of the tracks. And so some of them would, I presume, say no, but others would go do it. And once they found ones that they liked who kind of fit the profile, then they would outsource the recruitment to those girls. And there was actually one instance, in fact, where the girl, when they tried to assault her, because, they'd start out with the massage and then they would go from there. And the girls, at this point, you're in this billionaire's house, isolated behind a gate, and what are you going to do? They don't... It's a scary situation for a high school girl, obviously. A lot of the people who look at this situation, and I tend to find I guess it's not strange when you really think about it, but when I talk to men about this, they're like, kill that guy, just get rid of that guy. When you talk to women about it, I find that they're a little bit more punitive in their view. And maybe that's just because...
What was she doing there?
Yeah, they remember being 15 and they're like, I wasn't just some purely innocent dove at 15.
Well, men are protective as they should be of women.
And so there was one girl who, she did react that way. She, she refused to do anything. And they said, well, okay, it's all right. It's all right. We still think you're awesome. We want to get massages and everything. I'll tell you what, you don't have to do anything. But we'll give you $200 for every one of your friends that you bring. If you find others, you bring them in to do this, and we'll give them $200. You'll get $200 every time you do it. And she did it. And those girls, really kind of sickeningly, and I think, they were kind of portrayed in the press as like prostitution solicitors, and kind of, these are minors, these are high school girls being manipulated by adults who very skillfully manipulated billionaires. You know what I mean? So that's just a ridiculous idea to like place a responsibility on them. Kind of a sick thing to write in a newspaper, honestly. But and so they would do that. And, that's sort of in short. I mean, the girl who is from a broken family and has some problems from the wrong side of the tracks, she might know a girl who is from an intact, middle-class family with two concerned parents. But very often her friends are kind of from the same mold that she's from. Every once in a while they weren't, though, and this is part of how he got caught, is one of the girls that they brought in, they had a father. They had a mother who cared, and they had a pretty regular family who, after everything was over, she ran back to them and told them all about it, and they went to the police. And so the West Palm Beach, this was down in Florida, the West Palm Beach Police Department starts looking into the guy, starts gathering more information, starts talking to more witnesses. And very quickly, this thing starts expanding out so that 2 witnesses becomes 4, and 4 becomes 8, and 8 becomes 16. It's like expanding a lot, and they're realizing they have a big issue on their hands. And as they're going through, the Netflix documentary, it leaves out a lot of really important information, but it's really good on this stuff. They interview like the chief of police in West Palm Beach there at the time, and you can see he is just flabbergasted, outraged, just, to the point where, he says at one point that it cost him his faith in the U.S. criminal justice system, because he was getting stonewalled like crazy at the local level. People in his department or somewhere in the local government were leaking the information of the investigation to Jeffrey Epstein. So, for example, when they raided his house, finally, we went in there and all the computers had been taken away. It was totally ready for the raid and prepared for it. Everything was removed. And he was 100% tipped off, they say. And so he's facing this kind of resistance at the local level and the state prosecutor level. And so he does something that you don't do as a chief of police. He just went completely around his chain of command and went directly to the feds himself and said, I'm going to bring the feds in. Like, clearly the state and the local officials are just too corrupted, apparently. Maybe it's just because he's an important guy and they don't want to rock the boat and bring bad publicity. But whatever it is, I need to bring the heavy artillery in here because the feds aren't going to care. They're not, he's not big enough for them, supposedly. And so he gives it over to the feds. And that's when it ends up in the lap of Alex Acosta, who was the Southern District of Florida U.S. attorney at the time. And so they start looking into this guy and they start building out a case. You have this woman, Villanueva, I think her name was, who was the lead prosecutor for the U.S. Attorney's Office on the Epstein.
最早这个案件交到佛罗里达州南区的首席检察官呢，是这个 Alex Acosta， 没有错。但是呢，他是首席嘛，所以这个案子是先被丢到他的下属一位女检察官，也就是 Marie Villavena 的手上。所以后面你会听到这个 Derek Cooper 都是先讲 she， 都是指这个一开始承办的检察官，就是 Marie Villavena。这个女检察官，她原本信誓旦旦，以为可以稳操胜算，把这个性犯罪狂直接关到死。结果没有想到呢，却在她的上司，也就是这个 Alex Acosta， 居然就没有通知这个女检察官，直接就跟爱泼斯坦呢达成了一个认罪协商。
Case, and she, from all appearances at least, was very enthusiastic and earnest about trying to pursue this case, and was very upset about how the whole thing was handled by her superiors. But they're building out a case, and they get to the point where, and this was actually even before the West Palm Beach Police Department did this, the feds got handed a case with 40-something on-the-record underage witnesses accusing this guy, corroborating each other's stories, telling the exact same story of how they were recruited, what happened when they got there, what they were asked and made to do, everything down the line. Right? This is when the West Palm Beach first went to the prosecutor after they started building their case. They said the guy like sort of chuckled and laughed. He was like, this is going to be the easiest case I've ever done. This is an open, and we're going to put this guy away for 100 years. Like, this is the easiest case we're ever going to do. And he can't do it at the state level, so he hands it over to the feds. And open and shut, how do you get away from 40 on the record corroborating independent witnesses, right? You can you can discredit 1 or 2 or 10. You still got 30 left, you know, and goes to the feds, and they build out the case more. They bring in more witnesses. They gather more evidence, and all of a sudden, the prosecutor, she starts running into obstacles of her own. One of the things, for example, they found out was that the computers that had been taken out of his house in West Palm Beach were in the possession of somebody connected to Epstein's lawyers, and so she put out a Department of Justice subpoena demanding those computers from the lawyers and the people. And the lawyers kind of, you know, they delay and have meetings and, you know, put things off and so forth. And these are some of them people we've heard of, Alan Dershowitz, people like that, who they delay, and so one day she goes to her bosses and she kind of grills them a little bit, like, what the hell is going on here? You know, what? She wrote this in an email, actually. She was very aggressive about it, though. She's like, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know what the deal is, but like we have a child predator on our hands with an open and shut case to put this guy away for the rest of our life. What is the problem here? And she gets reprimanded and told in no uncertain terms, your attitude is not appreciated and you need to back off and all these kind of things by her superior. And so then one day, and this is while the subpoena's out for those computers, Alex Acosta personally goes and cuts a deal with Epstein's lawyers without telling the lead prosecutor who's looking into the case, without telling the victims, which is in contravention of victims' rights law. You know, if you're going to cut a deal with a sex offender, you got to tell the victims, hey, by the way, this is what's happening. Here's why we're doing it. And just so you know, he's going to be out of jail in a year or something. You have to tell them. It's the law.
This guy wind up as labor secretary.
That is a story worth looking into. I don't know. But
a lot of candidates for the gig.
So
that guy?
Yeah, he comes in.
Sorry.
And he cuts a deal with the lawyers that says that the federal government agrees not to prosecute Epstein for any of the crimes that are being alleged, any related crimes that have yet to be alleged, nor will they prosecute any of his accomplices, known or unknown. So crimes that come out in the future committed by people who aren't known about yet. He was asked in his vetting process, Alexander Acosta, hey, if this comes up, you know, this is a potential scandal. You gave this pedophile with all these victims against, you know, they had like 40 witnesses in that 2007, 2008 case. I mean, on the record, corroborating each other's stories independently. I mean, this was just the most open and shut case you can imagine. We'll get into the case here in a bit, but he was asked, how could you, you know, what's your excuse for giving this guy the deal that you gave him? Because it's kind of crazy. And he said, well, I was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Now, this is from to be fair, this is from an unnamed source in the administration who was involved in that vetting process, as told to the journalist Vicky Ward.
英明当初起诉就是说这么多名的女性，40名女性你会发现，就是我一直要讲的，就是受害女孩子都只被爱泼斯坦本人性侵过。虽然后面确实有出现少部分，好像朱佛雷啊，他控诉他有被英国的安德鲁王子呢，给强暴，但是你会发现大部分的女孩子长期的这种所谓的性侵跟 PUA 呢，都只针对爱泼斯坦本人。所以2008年呢，最后与联邦政府，也就是司法部这边达成的这一个认罪协商呢，只不过是改成他等于是皮条客的方式，也就是涉及了仲介性交易。那因此他的罪行就相对少很多，但也就因此后面随着这个安德鲁王子的这个指控呢，大家就甚嚣尘上，变成都一直认为说爱泼斯坦就是个皮条客。可是如果爱泼斯坦真的是个皮条客的话，那怎么会2008年对他最早的原始起诉的40名女性都只针对爱泼斯坦个人，并没有任何其他的相关人？所以我认为爱泼斯坦他确实是长期控制许多未成年少女，偶尔的拿来做所谓的性招待，但是他本身就不是一个专门靠这个为生的皮条客，大家要先理解这一层。而且他如果只是一个皮条客的话，你想美国政府会袒护他到这种程度吗？只是一个皮条客，自己又是一个性侵犯的话，那早就已经关到死了。所以问题来了，爱泼斯坦根本就不是我们以为的那样。那爱泼斯坦到底是谁呢？这个就要回过来从另外一个部分推敲了，那就是明面上爱泼斯坦他不是一直官方定调的一位掌握数十亿美元的对冲基金管理者吗？那到底这件事情是不是真的呢？我们接着看下去。
So if you take the official story, which is that he was a money manager of some kind, the only client that we know of was Les Wexner, but what he exactly even did for Wexner, nobody's really able to describe. And
so the official story is he's a money manager.
Right.
Is there any, so it's hard to manage money in a country whose financial systems are as regulated as ours are anonymously. So if you're actually managing money, certainly if you're conducting trades, there's a record. And in some capacities, you have to register.
Yeah.
Is there any documentary evidence that Jeffrey Epstein was in any recognizable sense a money manager?
Not only is there no documentary evidence, people who have to understand how, the regulatory environment is one reason that it's really hard to do any of this kind of thing on that scale under the radar, but also just on a personal network level, like in Wall Street and places like that. Like if you're a guy, so Jeffrey Epstein back in the 1980s, the claim was, at the time even, not just now, it's not something he came up with later, that he was a money manager who only took accounts of $1 billion or more. So you didn't just have to be a billionaire, you had to have $1 billion to invest with him, right? And a guy who knew him back then thought he would do Epstein a solid, and he brought him a client who had $600 million he wanted to invest with Epstein. This is 1980s money. It's like $2 billion today, like inflation adjusted, right? You show up with that kind of money to Goldman Sachs, and the CEO is going to meet you at the front door and take you up his private elevator.
100%.
And the company's vice presidents are going to give you a presentation about all the people that are going to be dedicated
and
only
a foot
to your
massage,
account, all that kind of
course,
stuff.
yes.
Like the biggest investment banks in the world are going to audition for you. You don't audition for them. You know what I mean? Like if you have that kind of money. Epstein blew the guy off. He said, "Oh no, it's too small. I don't deal with that kind of pocket change. $600 million today, $2 billion." And so you say, well, that's obviously ridiculous. Obviously, there is no fund manager in the world that would do that. And so why would he do that? And I think when you look at the whole record, the answer is obvious. He wasn't a money manager.
He didn't actually invest people's money.
Yeah, people think like a hedge fund is like a dude sitting at his desktop computer, like on E-Trade or something. Hedge funds have teams of analysts and mathematicians and all. It's a whole big business, and like people need to understand that. So nobody knows anybody who's ever worked for Epstein in this capacity. Nobody's ever. I mean, look, when you're operating at that level, if he was who he says he was, moving that kind of money around, you don't go buy shares in Microsoft. You take a position in the company. These are things that are done through large institutions, and you have to have institutional support so that they can gather up enough shares for you to purchase, and then structure the purchases in a way that it doesn't just suck all the liquidity out of the market and drive the market crazy on the stock price for a little while. This is a complex operation. There's a lot of people involved. Nobody has heard of anybody who's ever done any kind
and
of
there's
deal
no
with
record
Epstein.
of anything.
Nothing.
Him investing money, trading stocks, nothing.
Which is just impossible. I mean, it's flat out impossible that he was doing what the official story says he was doing, and there's just no trace of it. It's not possible.
好，为什么他是不是对冲基金经理人这么重要？因为这就要讲到爱泼斯坦他奇特的发家过程。如果他并不是一个真的会操作基金、投资股票交易的基金经理人的话，那他到底是靠什么能够这么有钱的？那我们呢就要借着 Derek Cooper 呢来向我们分解，一一回溯，到底爱泼斯坦最早只是一名犹太裔的数学老师，他是怎么样莫名其妙的跑到了美国华尔街最有名的贝尔斯登投资银行，而他又并不真的在这个投资银行里面进行所谓的股票交易。那么他到底都在做些什么，以及他是怎么样能够一步一步攀到他今天奇妙的发家致富的身家背景呢？我们接下来看爱泼斯坦的最早的起点。
For right now, I'd really just like to learn about Jeffrey Epstein. So with that, who was Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, Jeffrey Epstein just started out as a normal guy, born in Coney Island, in the 1950s. First record we really have of him when he appears for us is in 1974, when he's hired to teach mathematics at the Dalton School, which is an elite private school in New York City. Now, I'm not familiar with New York City K through 12 education system, but I'm told it's a very elite place that
it is.
Can have their pick of mathematics teachers from all over the world if they want it. And so they hire a guy who's 20 years old, who dropped out of college after 2 years at Cooper Union with no teaching experience to teach math at this school. Basically
at the age of 20?
At the age of 20, basically on the strength of a meeting with the headmaster of the school at the time, a guy by the name of Donald Barr.
Who was Donald Barr?
Yeah, so that name might sound familiar. Donald Barr is a very interesting character, not least because his son, Bill Barr, was the attorney general who had Jeffrey Epstein arrested and oversaw his death in the federal jail that he was in.
Can I just ask you, I've already said I wouldn't interject, but I'm asking you to pause already. What are the actual odds of that? The attorney general of the United States who arrested Jeffrey Epstein, oversaw his death, declared his death a suicide before the investigation ended, is the son of the guy who hired Jeffrey Epstein at age 20 with no teaching experience or college degree to teach at one of the most prestigious schools in Manhattan. What are the, if you were like, hey, Grok, what are the odds? What do you think the odds are?
Well, whatever the odds are, let's add a few more zeros to that.
Okay.
So Donald Barr was also somebody he used to work for the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA back during World War II. So he has that connection. Excuse me. Donald Barr also dabbled in science fiction writing in his spare time. One of the books that he wrote is called Space Relations, and he wrote it right around this time that he hired Jeffrey Epstein. And I've read the book, and you can go read about it on Wikipedia. It's close enough to basically what the plot is if you want to get the idea of it. The long and short is...
But you read the book.
Oh, yeah, I have a copy. I make sure I get a copy of things like that. I've got a copy of, I went out and made sure I got a copy of the Architectural Digest and Washington Life magazines that profiled Tony Podesta's house and art collection, just in case it disappears.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I got a copy of it. I read it. It's not a good book. It's a pulpy kind of L. Ron Hubbard style science fiction book, sort of. But the basic plot of it involves the main character who is kidnapped and sold into slavery on this alien planet that's ruled by 7 oligarchs who just have been corrupted by their power and their wealth to the point where they're basically insane, and they spend most of their time breeding young slaves and kidnapping children from around the universe to bring them home and use them as sex slaves. And the main character, he gets assigned or given to the one female oligarch on the planet. And at first, he's sort of one of her slaves and victims, but then she takes a liking to him and he joins her and participates in what's going on. And there are scenes in there right near the beginning. There's a scene of these grotesque aliens that kidnap the guy. That they make one of them makes the prisoners watch while he rapes a 15-year-old virginal redhead. And so these are the books that Donald Barr, former OSS agent, father of Bill Barr, the Attorney General who had Jeffrey Epstein arrested and oversaw his death. These are the kind of books that he was writing at the time that he hired the most notorious pedophile in American history. So whatever the odds of the first part were, you can probably add a few zeros to that, and we can keep adding zeros if you want.
I do. I mean, it's hard to believe that this is real, but it is real. What you're describing is real.
Yeah, totally real, totally verifiable. This is not stuff you're going to find on fringe websites. You can find it in any mainstream story about it, Wikipedia, even whatever. So Bill Barr himself, he was an intelligence-connected guy, very deeply. His first job out of college was as an intern for the CIA in the mid-'70s. And that doesn't sound like much until you learn that he was a legal intern with the CIA whose job was to be the liaison to Congress during the Church and Pike Committee hearings that were really like the first, and up to this point, probably only time that the CIA has faced a real threat of oversight and clamping down on its activities. And so this was a very, very critical time when a lot of the agency's secrets were coming out and they were facing the possibility of, well, they didn't know. I mean, the agency might have gotten shut down, if this had gone badly for them. And so Bill Barr is the legal intern who is the liaison. And what that meant was, he was the guy that when Congress requested some documents, he's like, okay, goes back to the agency. Here's what they want. Okay, well, here's what we can give them. And he goes back and convinces them that this is all there is or that they don't need the rest or anything like that. He was that guy, to smooth that over and make it work. And he apparently did a very good job because the boss of the CIA at the time was George H.W. Bush. When George H.W. Bush took over, was elected president in 1988, took over in 89, he brought in Bill Barr to be his attorney general, who's really, who spent most of his time, like at least the big story, I'm sure an attorney general does a lot of things and wears a lot of hats, but the major story that was going on at the time was cleaning up what was left of the Iran-Contra affair. And so you have the guy who was the legal intern for the CIA during the Church and Pike Committee hearings, brought in by the director of the CIA at the time to be the attorney general who is cleaning up the Iran-Contra affair that took place, obviously, while Bush was the vice president. He goes into the private sector for a while, reemerges when Donald Trump needs an attorney general of his own, not for any particular reason, I guess, except, then this happens. He just happens to arrest the guy that his father gave his first job to, a job that he was totally unqualified for, and a guy who had proclivities that most of us find very strange and unacceptable and are very, very rare, but coincidentally happened to be the very topic that Donald Barr, Bill Barr's father, liked to write books about. So very strange. It could all be a coincidence, but...
The odds are against that. So Donald Barr hires, that's a remarkable story. And I believe, and I said it to him, that Bill Barr, as Attorney General, helped cover up Epstein's death, the details of his death. Again, here are the facts. The facts are that he declared it a suicide before they'd finished the investigation or even really began the investigation. So that alone suggests dishonesty, I think. Anyway, or lack of rigor or something. What happened to Jeffrey Epstein at Dalton? How long was he there?
He was there for about 1.5 years, 2 years only. And then he was fired for poor performance, is how it got written up. And maybe it was that. Again, he had no teaching experience and no college degree, so it may have just been he was a bad math teacher. But there are people who had children as students at the time who actually say he was a good math teacher. So maybe it had to do with something else. Maybe it had to do with the fact that there were already allegations against Jeffrey Epstein by the girls he was teaching at this high school of inappropriate behavior. He would even show up to high school parties sometimes where kids are drinking and partying, and he would show up as the teacher, the adult, and kind of just try to join in. So there were those complaints that were going on. But while he was at Dalton School, before he got run out, one of the students he was teaching was, the father of one of the students he was teaching was the CEO of the investment bank Bear Stearns at the time, Ace Greenberg, he's known as. And he approached, I've heard it was Barr himself. I don't know if that's the case, but he approached somebody who was one of his bosses or one of the people who had brought him into the school and asked if he would make the introduction to Ace Greenberg and put in a good word for him. And so he meets Greenberg, and Greenberg, when he gets run out of Dalton, brings him on at Bear Stearns. And they put him to work.
So by this point, Jeffrey Epstein's like 22, 21?
Thereabouts. This is 1976. I think he was born in 53. So yeah, 23 years old maybe.
With no college degree, 2 years of college at Cooper Union, and he's been a high school math teacher, and he got basically fired from that job, and he gets hired at Bear Stearns?
He gets hired at Bear Stearns.
Is that normal?
I couldn't tell you, especially back then. I'm not really sure.
Does it sound normal?
I doubt it.
Doesn't sound normal, but whatever.
So he gets brought in, and the story goes that they put him on the options desk at first, but he was not very good at it or not very engaged or interested in it. And so they put him in their special products division where Jimmy Kane, who took over as CEO of Bear Stearns from Ace Greenberg, described what Epstein did there in the special products division. And he basically, in so many words, in sort of the Wall Street financial speak, said that his job was to help wealthy clients hide their money, to create, tax advantageous transactions that would, that kind of thing.
Yes.
But it was to help wealthy clients hide their money. And while he was doing that, he met and came into contact with a lot of well-known people who became very important for the rest of his
wealthy
career.
Clients.
Clients. Yeah. And it's like one of them, for example, was Edgar Bronfman, who will come up later in our story. He's one of the heirs to the Seagram's liquor fortune. Very connected guy. We'll probably get to that in a while. But that only lasts 4 years. He's there at Bear Stearns from 76 to 1980, and then he gets run out of Bear Stearns for a regulatory violation. And, the story kind of goes there. The official story from the people who were all involved in it at the time are that he was breaking the rules, and they were very, very, very upset about it. But apparently he stayed close friends with Ace Greenberg and Jimmy Kane for a long time after that, and he banked with Bear Stearns all the way up until the time the investment bank collapsed in 2008. So there weren't that many hard feelings or that intense of hard feelings, apparently. But he left, and I think the reason for it is probably pretty obvious. He just got a little too aggressive and flew a little too close to the sun doing the job that they had hired him to do, you know? And so he had to leave because there was a violation. They didn't want the attention and everything, but he landed on his feet. He stayed friends with the people who hired him, all those kind of things. And this is where it gets really interesting. So again, to go over his resume, he does 2 years of college, drops out, gets hired as a high school math teacher, is run out of that job ignominiously, either for poor performance or for harassing his female students. Then he goes to work for Bear Stearns, does that for just a few years, and gets run out of there for a regulatory violation. And that is his resume at this point. There's nothing else I'm leaving out. The very next year, and this would make him, I guess, 28 years old. It's 1981. He's 28 years old. We have him on a private airplane with a big-time British arms broker named Douglas Leese, very big player back in the 1980s, on a private plane to go to a meeting at the Pentagon with this guy.
Okay, not for the first time. I'm going to stop you and say it doesn't make any sense at all.
So if you're looking at it in a conventional way, it doesn't make any sense.
Not if you assume the world works in the ways that we're told it works. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. And so you have to ask, what is it that a guy like Douglas Leese would be, what interest would he have in a guy like Jeffrey Epstein? Even if he was a money man of some kind, presumably a guy like that can have any money man he wants. Why does he need a guy like Jeffrey Epstein? And I think the answer is, and this is the answer that a lot of researchers have come to over the years, and I think it's the most obvious one, at least, the simplest, is that when you look at the kind of things that somebody like Lease would do, it's not as if Lease owned a weapons manufacturer. That's not what he did. He was a fixer. He was a guy who made the deals happen. He made sure the right people got paid off, and that everything was kind of smoothed over so that these things would go through. He was mentioned, for example, in the UK Parliament in the 1980s in reference to the El Yamama weapons deal with Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest weapons deal in UK history, I think, to this day. BAE Systems alone has made $46 billion off this deal over the years, and I think that was up through 2010 or something, so it's probably higher now. But there have been allegations from politicians, from lawyers, journalists, other weapons companies who were upset about their competition getting a leg up this way, that there was bribery. There was all kinds of shady stuff going on behind the scenes to make sure that the deal went the way that they wanted it to go. And, you think that a guy a guy like Lease, whose job is to go around and make sure that people are being paid off with illicit funds that cannot be traced, because then you end up like Lockheed Martin did when they got caught bribing officials in Japan to sign off on a weapons deal there. Nobody wants that. You got to hide your money better. You got to figure out how to do that in a way that nobody's going to track it. And that's why you need a guy like Jeffrey Epstein. You're not going to be able to walk in the front door of Goldman Sachs and say, I need to talk to one of your money managers. Hey, can you launder this money for me? You need a guy who's morally compromised, who is willing to get down in the dirt and do this kind of work. And that is what Jeffrey Epstein had just spent the last 4 years at Bear Stearns doing. I don't know how, I don't know, this may be out there, but I can't remember ever coming across how it is he met Lease. But it was probably, through the wealthy clients that he was working for there at Bear Stearns, so that when he did get run out, they made sure he landed on his feet and he was doing something that he could actually succeed at. And so you go through the 1980s, and Lease is the guy who introduces him to Robert Maxwell. He introduces him to a lot of big players and figures in European politics and in the economy, and introduces him to Maxwell. And Maxwell introduces him to his daughter Ghislaine, who became his partner in crime, I guess you'd say, over the years. And Robert Maxwell's a super interesting character, because this is the reason that I brought up near the beginning. And we should probably say, like, the thing that people are really interested in this story about, I mean, there's the tabloid aspect of it. I think there's a lot of people out there who just, there's all this talk about the Epstein list. They want there to be a safe that the FBI opens up or drills a hole and cracks into, and then there's just a ledger of, signed in blood, I, Jeffrey Epstein, compromised these famous movie stars and politicians on these dates. That's what people want. They're not going to get that. That kind of thing doesn't exist.
为什么没有客户名单？因为他的主要工作，他根本就不是一个拉皮条的，更不要说靠拉皮条，然后偷拍这个所谓政商名流的性爱光碟来以此做要挟的人。看完今天这一集，你就会发现他比你想的更复杂。他根本不用做这些事，因为他是一个过去被美国政府或者说美国情报单位长期保护的非常非常具有高度特权的人。他的扑朔迷离的真实身份决定了他根本就不是你以为看到那样，但是这并不能够掩盖他自己的这种邪恶的性癖。
Everybody wants more information on this story. It's just too good to be true from like a network or newspaper perspective, right? You're talking about like billionaire playboy who has connections just around world governments and U.S. government, including just wealthy, famous people, business owners, people that everybody has heard of and sees on TV all the time, that guy was running a mass pedophile ring. And the labor secretary under Donald Trump, who was the guy in charge of prosecuting him in 2007, said that he belonged to intelligence. I would think that every newspaper in the country and every cable news channel in the country would have a team of reporters camped out on that dude's lawn to stick a microphone in his face every time he left his house and say, what did you mean by that? Can we get some kind of clarity on whether this pedophile was, belonging to, but we don't get that. And when you don't get things like that, you get a lot of room for speculation, and it's kind of
justified speculation. I mean, what is that? And instead, you get a lot of emphasis on the sex part, which deserves attention. Of course, these are sex crimes, apparently, in some cases against minors. Horrible, not acceptable. But the other parts are completely ignored. Like, what was this guy doing? This Cooper Union non-graduate who went to Bear Stearns, and then he's with an arms dealer flying private to a meeting at the Pentagon. Like, take 3 steps back. What is that?
Hired by a guy at that first job who had connections to intelligence through the OSS, whose son was a CIA connected guy. So all of these, the reason I threw out all of these kind of intelligence connections that aren't, this is all circumstantial stuff that doesn't attach necessarily. The fact that Donald Barr worked for the OSS back during the war, or that his son Bill Barr worked for the CIA, that doesn't by itself mean anything about Epstein.
I think his son Bill Barr spent 6 years?
I think 6, yeah.
So he wasn't just an intern, and by the way, he stayed.
Right.
Was an employee. But it's not just circumstantial, because you have apparently the former Labor Secretary saying, former U.S. Attorney, federal prosecutor saying he belonged to intelligence. So anyway, I'm not trying to justify my interest in this. I don't think it needs justifying, but I think the people who haven't covered the story and the material parts of the stuff that actually really matters, they need to justify their lack of interest in it. Like, what is that, New York Times?
Yeah, it's natural to start asking questions when a question that would occur to anybody, somebody who just heard a 5-minute synopsis of the story, and they're from Mars and they have never heard any of it before. You tell them the short little story, a 5-minute version of it that I just told you, and the first thing they're going to ask is, well, what did he mean when he said that Epstein belonged to intelligence? What's going on there? And you can't get a journalist to ask that question.
那最后最重要的呢，就是 Derek Cooper 提到说，当初2008年认罪协商呢，联邦政府交换的条件居然就是把爱泼斯坦在他家中呢，当初由这个女检察官 Mary 所扣押的电脑呢，在没有经过 Mary 的通知之下，就全部归还给了爱泼斯坦，并且不予以查证。这就引起了后面 Tucker Carlson 的一个结论说，为什么现在川普政府邦迪这边司法部要去公开所谓的爱泼斯坦的资料这么困难？一个很大原因是因为从2008年开始，美国政府早就已经高度在保护爱泼斯坦的个人相关隐私，政府根本就没有对他展开搜查的行动。那么你有多少的资料是现在存在可以提供在川普政府手上的呢？
And as a condition of the deal, the subpoena for his computers was dropped. Okay.
So it sounds like they intentionally didn't gather a lot of evidence.
100%.
So this is relevant. The reason I'm bringing it up is there's this, I said I wouldn't talk about contemporary politics, but there's this huge controversy over why isn't the DOJ releasing all this information? And my informed understanding is, at least to some extent, because they don't have it, and they don't have it because it was never gathered. And I don't know why nobody has said that publicly. I'm not making excuses for anybody, by the way, but it's really interesting. So the cover-up began immediately.
100%, and went all the way up to the federal level.
好，看完这一集，我敢说你会是掌握最全方位、最全面爱泼斯坦的第一消息者。今天这一集可以说是让我们能够真实的看到爱泼斯坦其人，以及在他身上凸显出了美国的一种深层政府的特权阶级的存在。也就是像爱泼斯坦这样的人呢，其实照理说他仍然应该要严厉的被给予审判。那你想，爱泼斯坦在2019年在川普第一届当上美国总统的时候就被重新抓了起来，难道美国深层政府不会有人想要除掉他吗？好，因为如果真的落在川普手上的时候，依照他的素人总统的个性，他会不会不顾过去美国多年来长期政府这样子秘密保护的一个重要的情报特工，或者说情报机构的关系人呢？从这一层你再来想，爱泼斯坦莫名的死于川普总统的任期，这个事情反而凸显出深层政府这边，我个人认为是对川普的一种未知数的忌惮。但是呢，无论如何，今天也让我们理解到为什么川普这么介意这个事情一直被民主党现在炒作拿来影射。其实民主党一开始最不想公开的就是爱泼斯坦的真面目，但是既然爱泼斯坦已经死无对证，而且民主党也知道川普政府手上根本就没有什么了不起、什么特别资料的时候，反而随着 Mega 团体道德的主张呢，跟着一起起哄，对川普政府穷追猛打，因为他们知道川普政府能够碰触的那些不为人知的机密文件，连2008年开始都这样保护了，都不愿意去扣查爱泼斯坦的电脑了。那你还真的认为过去的美国政府有在对爱泼斯坦做什么深入的调查吗？不用调查，根本就是自己人。好 ，OK， 希望今天这一集呢，让你能够重新对这个事情有一个更完整的理解。下一集我仍然会来谈一些我们这一集里头没有谈到的几个细节。不过今天这一集可以说已经是最核心也是最重要的一集，希望让你有满满的收获。我们这边是超级神队友，我们就下部影片再见，拜拜。